They call her alone, as if solitude were a wound that needs to be healed, as if a woman sitting quietly by herself must be broken, incomplete, forgotten. But what if alone doesn't mean empty? What if it means free? There is a quiet revolution happening behind closed doors, in small apartments and sunlit kitchens, where women in their 60s are learning the art of being with themselves. No audience, no expectations, no roles to perform, just presence, just peace. For so long, society has whispered a single story into a woman's ear, that her worth begins where a man's gaze lands, that love is her final destination, that growing old alone is the ultimate failure. But there are women rewriting that story slowly, gracefully, without apology. They are no longer waiting for someone to arrive. They are the arrival. Freud once said that human desire is rarely our own. It's shaped by the unseen hands of culture, childhood, and the unconscious. For many women, the longing for companionship wasn't born from the soul, but from conditioning, from stories that said, "A woman without a man is like a sky without the Sunday." But the truth? The sky shines just fine on its own. She has begun to see it. The way peace moves differently when no one else is watching. The way silence starts to feel like music. The way the world still holds her, even when no hand does. This stage of her life isn't loneliness. It's reclamation. She no longer performs the part of the good wife, the caretaker, the mirror that reflects someone else's worth. She has learned to be the mirror for herself, to look into her reflection and not ask, "Who am I to others?" but rather, "Who am I when no one needs me?" That's not an easy question. It can feel terrifying at first, because for 60 years, the noise of responsibility filled every corner of her mind. Children, partners, parents, society, all pulling her identity into 1,000 tiny directions. And now, just stillness, just breath, just her. But what the world calls emptiness, she now calls space. The kind of space where new life begins, not in youth, but in awareness. For the first time, she doesn't have to fit into anyone's idea of what a woman should be. She is not a mother, not a wife, not a role. She is simply a being who exists. And that, perhaps, is the most radical thing a woman can do. This is what I call the quiet revolution. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply lives. It exists in the gentle rituals of her mornings, the coffee cup steaming beside an open window, the hum of a song that no one else will ever hear, the comfort of knowing she can choose every small thing for herself, without compromise, without permission. And in that silence, she discovers something unexpected. The soul was never designed to be completed by another. It was meant to remember itself. In her 60s, she is not withering, she is returning to her essence, to her curiosity, to her quiet strength. The world doesn't know how to describe this kind of woman, because she doesn't fit into their categories, not wife, not mother, not widow. She is beyond them all, and maybe that's why people call her alone, because they don't yet have a word for whole. They call her alone because they can't understand. The kind of peace that doesn't need witnesses. God of me, there's a kind of silence that only comes after decades of noise. It's not peaceful at first, it's haunting, because in that silence, the echoes of a lifetime begin to speak. When a woman reaches her 60s and finds herself alone, she is not just living in the present. She is sitting beside every version of herself she's ever been. The girl who once dreamed of love, the woman who gave too much, the mother who forgot her own name while remembering everyone else's, the lover who mistook attention for affection, the wife who smiled through quiet disappointments. They all come back, one by one, not to haunt her, but to ask for closure. Freud believed that nothing in the mind truly disappears. Every emotion, every sacrifice, every forgotten dream, they all hide beneath the surface, waiting to be felt again. And when life finally becomes quiet enough, they rise. This is what many women in their 60s face, a gentle confrontation with their unlived life. The years they spent serving, loving, giving, but not always choosing. The hidden grief of a woman who lived for everyone but herself. Have you ever felt that ache, that strange sadness that comes not from what you lost, but from what you never allowed yourself to be? She begins to see how the world taught her to measure her worth, by how needed she was, by how much she gave, by how well she stayed quiet. And now that no one needs her, she's forced to ask, who am I without my usefulness? It's a question that shakes the ground beneath her, because for the first time, she's not defined by anyone else's story. And that kind of freedom can feel like fear at first. But beneath that fear lies a strange power, the power to rebuild identity from the ashes of expectation. Freud once called it the return of the repressed, when what was buried finally comes home. And when it does, it demands honesty. So she starts to face her truths. The ones she buried beneath routines and obligations, the little dreams she whispered but never lived, the emotions she softened to keep the peace, and the quiet resentment that comes from always being the strong one. Now, in the stillness of her own company, those feelings are no longer enemies. They are messengers. They tell her, you were never weak for wanting more. You were never selfish for needing rest. You were never wrong for choosing yourself just late. And so, she forgives herself, not dramatically, not loudly, just softly, like someone closing a door that's been open for too long. She realizes that loneliness isn't the punishment. It's the teacher. It's showing her what she's carried for 60 years, and what she no longer has to. Because when a woman finally puts down the weight of who she was told to be, she starts to rise, not higher, but deeper, into herself. There comes a time when you stop chasing belonging and begin returning home to yourself. There's a quiet moment somewhere between grief and grace, when a woman realizes that her story isn't over, not even close. For decades, she was taught that desire fades with age, that beauty has an expiration date, that after 60, the fire becomes ashes. But she begins to see something no one told her. Desire never truly dies. It just changes form. Freud once said that the energy of desire, the libido, is not only about sex, but about life itself. It's the pulse that moves through everything we create, love, and imagine. And when a woman learns to redirect it inward, she becomes magnetic in a new way. Not the kind of magnetism that seeks approval, but the kind that radiates quiet certainty. The kind that makes people pause without knowing why. Because there's something sacred about a woman who no longer needs validation to feel alive. She doesn't seduce through her body anymore. She seduces through her presence, through her calm, through her self-acceptance. Have you ever seen it? That woman who walks into a room without trying to be seen, and yet she is the room. Her silence commands attention more than words ever could. That's what happens when you reclaim your own desire. It becomes less about who wants you, and more about what you want to feel while you're still here. She starts to fall in love again, not with someone, but with the simple pleasures she forgot to notice. The smell of rain on her balcony, the sound of jazz in an empty kitchen, the way the sunlight kisses her skin through the curtains. She rediscovers the sensuality of being alive, and that, Freud would say, is the truest form of erotic energy. To feel deeply, even without another. For the first time, she isn't afraid of her reflection. The lines around her eyes aren't flaws, they're maps, proof that she has lived, not just existed. And each scar carries the story of someone who kept beginning again. There's a new kind of seduction now, one rooted not in youth, but in wholeness. Because when a woman stops performing, she starts embodying, and that's what makes her irresistible. To the world, and to herself, the most beautiful woman is not the one who looks young, but the one who finally feels free. And yet, beneath this newfound peace lies another awakening, one that asks a deeper question. Can she love again, without losing herself this time? That's where her journey moves next, toward the delicate, dangerous art of loving without disappearing. Love, for her, used to mean merging, becoming softer, smaller, quieter, so someone else could feel bigger beside her. She once mistook self-erasure for devotion. She thought that giving everything was the only way to be loved deeply. But time and solitude have taught her otherwise. Now, she understands that the truest kind of love is not about losing yourself in someone, but finding yourself alongside them. Freud wrote that all relationships are mirrors of the self. that we fall in love, not just with a person, but with the part of ourselves they awaken. And in her 60s, she finally sees it clearly. Love is not a rescue, it's a reflection. When she was younger, she wanted to be chosen. Now, she wants to be seen, not as a savior, not as a sacrifice, but as a whole being, with edges, with silence, with dreams that still burn quietly inside her. Have you ever felt that? That strange peace that comes when you no longer need someone to complete you? That's the kind of love she's learning now. It's not about chasing butterflies, but about resting beside someone who doesn't disturb her stillness. This time, she doesn't confuse comfort with chemistry. She doesn't mistake attention for affection. She doesn't try to heal through being needed, because she finally understands that love, without self-respect, is just loneliness disguised as devotion. In her 60s, she loves, slower, but deeper. She listens longer, she speaks less. Not because she has nothing to say, but because peace doesn't need explanation. She can walk away without bitterness, because she knows that losing someone is never as tragic as losing herself again. Freud believed that the ability to love and to work defined psychological maturity, and now she does both. She loves as a free soul, and she works on herself without apology. There's something magnetic about a woman who no longer bargains for affection. She doesn't chase, she attracts, not through her beauty, but through her boundaries, through the quiet confidence that says, I choose myself first and still have love to give. This kind of love isn't dramatic. It's steady, it's sacred. It's born from two whole people, standing side by side, not two broken ones clinging to survival. You will never lose the right person by being your truest self. And now, for the first time in her life, she isn't afraid of endings, because she's learned that every ending is just another name for becoming. What comes next isn't about loss or love, but about legacy, the quiet power of a woman who has lived, learned, and is finally ready to leave behind more than memories, to leave behind meaning. There's a kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be noticed. It simply exists. The beauty of a woman who has stopped running, who has stopped proving, who has made peace with her own silence. At 60, she no longer measures her worth by the gaze of others. Her reflection has become her companion, not her critic. She sits by the window in the morning, watching the sunlight fall across her hands, and thinks, I've made it here, and I'm finally enough. Freud once wrote that maturity begins when we learn to love without illusion and to face life without denial. And that's her now, a woman who no longer hides behind roles, who has faced herself, layer by layer, until only truth remained. Her home is quiet, but it hums with something's sacred presence. Every object tells a story, a faded photograph, a half-read book, a letter she never sent. Each piece of her life holds both sorrow and grace, woven together like the threads of an unfinished prayer. She used to think loneliness was a curse. Now she knows it was initiation, a sacred solitude that stripped her down to the purest form of herself. Because in learning to live alone, she discovered something rare, peace that doesn't depend on company, joy that doesn't need an audience, love that begins and ends within. Have you ever met a woman like that? She doesn't speak loudly, but her presence changes the air. There's wisdom in her pauses and kindness in her restraint. You feel it, the weight of a life fully lived, not perfectly, but consciously. She no longer asks, what will people think? Instead, she wonders, did I live honestly today? Did I love well? Did I forgive myself? These are the questions that shape her now, not from fear, but from awareness. Because after decades of giving herself away in fragments, she has finally returned, whole, grounded, luminous. Her solitude has become her sanctuary, her wisdom, her offering, her life, her masterpiece. She became the woman she once needed, and that was her greatest victory. And perhaps that's what the psychology of a woman in her 60s truly is. Not a study in loneliness, but in liberation. She is proof that it's never too late to rewrite the story of who you are, to fall in love with your mind, to trust your own timing, to find beauty in your quiet becoming. Because the truth is, a woman who belongs to herself is never truly alone. She is at home, finally, in her own soul.